In the year 636, a major conflict would unravel that would be known as the Battle of Yarmuc. The Battle of Yarmuc was a significant military engagement that took place in 636 AD between the Byzantine Empire and the Arab forces of the Rashidun Caliphate. It was a major confrontation during the early Arab-Muslim expansion and played a crucial role in shaping the history of the region. The battle occurred during the early years of the Islamic Caliphate, following the death of the Prophet Muhammad in 632 AD. The Muslim forces, under the leadership of Caliph Umar ibn al-Khattab, sought to expand their territory beyond the Arabian Peninsula. The Muslims had initially invaded Syria in what was a series of carefully planned and well-coordinated military operations, which employed strategy instead of pure strength to deal with the Byzantine defensive measures. The Muslim armies, however, soon proved to be too small to handle the Byzantine response in the region, and their commanders called for reinforcements. The great Muslim general Khalid ibn al-Walid was sent by the Caliph Abu Bakr from Iraq to Syria with reinforcements and to lead the invasion. In July, the Byzantines were decisively defeated at Ajnadain. Damascus fell in September, followed by the Battle of Fal, in which the last significant garrison of Palestine was defeated and routed, giving the Muslim forces a major foothold in the Syrian region. After Abu Bakr died in 634, his successor, Umar, was determined to continue the Caliphate's expansion deeper into Syria. Though previous campaigns led by General Khalid had been successful, he was replaced by Abu Ubaidah. Having secured southern Palestine, Muslim forces now advanced up the trade route, and Tiberias and Baalbek fell without much struggle and conquered Emesa early in 636. The Muslims then continued their conquest across the Levant. To check the Arab advance and to recover lost territory, Byzantine Emperor Heraclius had sent a massive expedition to the Syrian region in May 636, commanded by the Armenian general Vahan. As the Byzantine army approached, the Arabs under the command of both generals Abu Ubaidah and Khalid ibn al-Walid tactically withdrew from Syria and regrouped all their forces at the Yarmouk plains, close to the Arabian Peninsula. The Byzantium forces led by General Vahan pursued them onto the plains of Yarmouk. The overall size of the Byzantium army was estimated to be around 60,000 soldiers across multiple contingents. On the Byzantine right flank was the Greek forces commanded by the general Gregory, with cavalry supporting from the rear. On the Byzantine left flank was the Slavic forces commanded by the Slavic prince Kanatir, with cavalry supporting from the rear. The Byzantine center consisted of the Armenian and Ghassanid forces commanded by the generals Jabalah and Dairjan, with cavalry supporting from the rear. Both forces came within sight of one another. The Byzantines were not in any rush to engage with the Muslims, as they had the numerical advantage. Byzantine General Vahan was instructed by Emperor Heraclius to try and bribe the Muslim forces to return back to Arabia, or at the very least stall in the negotiations until the Sasanian reinforcements could arrive. Before the conflict arose, the Sasanians had made a pact with the Byzantines to ally against the invading Muslim forces. The Muslim forces too were stalling, as more reinforcements were arriving sent by Caliph Umar. Negotiations continued on for 3 months. Vahan was concerned that he might lose the numerical advantage, so he took matters into his own hands and asked to negotiate with General Khalid in person. Whilst Khalid and Vahan were negotiating, the Armenian general insulted the Khalid by regarding that the Arabs were nothing more than impoverished, hungry, wretched Bedouins. He then offered Khalid food and gold to leave Byzantine lands. Khalid was unimpressed by Vahan's condescendence, calling on the Christian general to embrace Islam in exchange for peace, adding, "If you refuse, there can only be war between us." and you will face men who love death as you love life." Vahan was neither impressed by Khalid's words. Vahan stated to the Muslim commander, "Better men tried to take our lands but were all defeated." The negotiations, which had dragged on for many months, finally came to a close. Vahan positioned the main Byzantine camp near Al-Yaqusa, from where one of the main Roman roads connecting Egypt and Syria could be defended. He positioned his main force to the gorge in the south and arrayed his troops along the Alan River. Vahan ordered his forces into battle formation. Though before the engagement took place, many Muslim warriors stepped forward calling upon the Byzantine officers to engage them in single combat. Their challenge was answered. The Muslim warriors cut down the Byzantine officers, thus inciting Vahan to order forth his numerically superior force to charge at the enemy lines and test the resolve and strength of the Muslim soldiers. The Byzantine forces had the Muslims outnumbered at about 60,000 to 40,000 men, forcing the Muslims to stretch their frontal lines more thinly to compensate for their numerical inferiority. As the day came to a close, Vahan ordered his force to break off the attack and return back to the Byzantium position near the Alan River. Vahan had just wanted to test the Muslim lines and scout any weaknesses he could locate. The first day of fighting had come to a close, with minimal casualties sustained by both armies. The next morning, the Byzantium commander Vahan ordered forth all of his soldiers. His intent was to catch the Muslims off guard whilst they were giving morning prayers. The Muslims, particularly General Khalid, anticipated that Vahan would deploy such tactics. Khalid's scouts, whom were stationed across the field of Yarmouk, had alerted Khalid of the oncoming Byzantium forces. Whilst having lost the element of surprise, General Vahan remained confident in his superior numbers and opted to give battle. General Vahan's plan was to attack the Muslim center in order to tie down the bulk of Khalid's men, while focusing the main assault on the Muslim flanks, where Vahan expected to quickly overwhelm and drive the Muslims from the battlefield with his superior numbers. As the two armies engaged, Khalid's men firmly held their ground in the center. As for Khalid's troops on the flanks, the situation was not looking good. The Byzantium general Kanatir, along with his Slavic forces, attacked Khalid's right flank in full force. The Muslim infantry on the right flank were vastly outnumbered and were slowly pushed back. The Muslim general commanding the right flank, Amr, ordered his cavalry forth to reinforce his infantry from being overwhelmed by the Byzantium advance. Amr's cavalry were successful in slowing down the Byzantium charge, but Kanatir continued pushing forward, until eventually the Muslims had their backs turned toward their camp. Women from the Muslim camp rushed out, with some joining the fighting and others gathering available camels and setting them loose around the camp, providing a screen of protection for the Muslim soldiers. A desperate fight ensued. The Byzantine soldiers were unable to break the ever-determined Muslim soldiers. Kanatir's heavy cavalry were tied down. Their horses would not advance forward as the aggressive roaming camels struck fear within the horses, making them uneasy and unable to be controlled. Whilst engaged in close quarters, the heavily armored Byzantium riders were pulled down from their saddles by Muslim soldiers. Kanatir's formation was broken, and his force could no longer sustain the assault. With Vahan's full-on assault against the Muslim right flank broken, Muslim commander Khalid ibn al-Walid seized this opportunity to try and exploit the spaces that had opened up between Kanatir and the rest of the Byzantium center. Khalid ordered Amr to send his cavalry to attack Kanatir's exposed flank from the north. Seeing that Khalid's cavalry support was arriving, Amr ordered all of his forces to advance. The Muslim attack struck from all flanks, which forced Kanatir to give up ground and slowly retreat towards the safety of the main Byzantium line. Though even with fewer men, Khalid's perfect timing and excellent maneuvering was successful in pushing back the Byzantium aggressors. Fortunately for the Byzantium flank, Kanatir's Slavic infantry were experienced veterans, which allowed them to retreat in good order. Otherwise, their flank could have completely collapsed, thus exposing the entirety of the Byzantium main line. On the opposite side of the battlefield, the Muslim left flank found itself in considerably more trouble. With the bulk of the Muslim cavalry currently reinforcing on the right flank, the Muslim general commanding the left flank, Yazid, was losing ground to the Greek Byzantines advancing forward. On the Byzantium right, the General Gregory's infantry continued to slowly advance forward, pushing back Yazid's outnumbered infantry. Simultaneously, Byzantium cavalry were able to break through the ranks and push the Muslims back towards their camps. As they fell back to the camp, Yazid's soldiers had insults and rocks thrown at them by the enraged Arab women, who urged their men to not let the enemy defeat them. Yazid was finally able to stop the Byzantium push, stabilizing his lines near the camp. Similar to what had occurred on the right flank earlier, some of the Arab women began taking up arms in the defense of the camp. Just as it appeared that the Muslim left was on the verge of collapsing, General Khalid once again demonstrated his ability to adapt quickly. Khalid, soon after stabilizing his right flank, swiftly rode his cavalry contingent across the battlefield to reinforce Yazid's struggling force. As Khalid swiftly approached the flank, he detached a cavalry contingent under the command of Darar ibn al-Azwar, ordering him to flank the engaged Byzantium center. This maneuver proved to be crucial, as when Darar attacked the flank of the Byzantium center, his contingent held them in place, preventing Byzantium reinforcements from reaching Gregory's forces to support the push against the Muslim left. Furthermore, Khalid arrived in time to Yazid's aid, charging directly at Gregory's men. With lost momentum and the flanks now being struck by Khalid's cavalry, the Greeks began to lose ground under pressure. While slowly retreating, they began to suffer heavy casualties. The simple act of this maneuver by Khalid gave the impression to the Byzantium Greeks that they were being outflanked, damaging their morale. Simultaneously, the fighting at the center persisted. Muslim commander Darar's troops were able to kill the Armenian Byzantine commander Dairjan, whom fought alongside his soldiers on the front lines. As the sun began to dwindle and the day came to a close, both forces stopped fighting for the day. For Byzantium, General Vahan, losing Dairjan, one of his key lieutenants, was a massive blow to his army. Khalid's maneuverability and ability to effectively counter Vahan's advances forced the Byzantium commander to re-strategize his tactics. On the third day of the battle, the Byzantines once again advanced toward the Muslim line. General Vahan's new plan of attack was to focus mainly on attacking the Muslim right flank, as that was where the bulk of the Byzantine heavy cavalry could inflict the most amount of harm and thus open up spaces for exploitation. The Byzantine lines come crashing into the Muslim lines. The fighting is fierce and bloody, with casualties starting to build up on both sides. With the lines now fully engaged, Vahan's plan begins to unfold. Jabala and Kanatir's men aggressively advance forward with their numerical advantage, slowly pushing back the Muslim lines bit by bit and allowing gaps for the cavalry to open up. With gaps starting to open up in the formation, Jabala and Kanatir's heavy cavalry swiftly spring into action, looking to quickly exploit the openings and surround the Muslim right flank. As the lines collided, the Byzantine heavy cavalry crashed into the lighter Muslim cavalry, causing significantly more damage and disarray among Muslim ranks. Both of the Muslim commanders Amr and Shurabil's forces were pushed back by both Jabala and Kanatir's deeper ranks. As Jabalah's flank slowly opened up and became exposed, Khalid swiftly rode his cavalry into action at this precise moment, charging his men into the gap towards the outstretched Ghassanid flanks. With Khalid's crucial assistance, Amr manages to rally his men and re-engage the enemy. With the sight of Khalid on the battlefield, morale is boosted among the Muslims. Shortly too, Shurahbil is able to reorganize his men after suffering losses and begin pushing back the Byzantine forces. The fighting soon develops into a slaughter as the outflanked Jabalah and his Ghassanids begin retreating in disarray. Seeing Jabalah disengage from the fight, Kanatir and his men follow soon after. Yet again, Khalid's well-executed flanking attack stopped the Byzantine advance. On the fourth day of battle, Byzantine General Vahan opted to continue on with the same battle tactics. He ordered both Kanatir and Jabalah forward to give battle on the Muslim right. Meanwhile, Vahan opted to keep his Armenian force and Gregory's Greek force advancing at a slower pace. As Kanatir's Slavic division and Jabalah's Ghassanid division met the Muslim lines, they had them hard-pressed and on the defensive. The Arab light cavalry was particularly having a lot of trouble holding the charge of the Byzantine cataphracts. Meanwhile, Vahan ordered the Armenians and Greeks forward at a slower pace. General Khalid now feared an all-out attack by the Byzantines across his entire line. Khalid knew that his army had suffered far too many casualties in the previous days of battle, leaving him with not enough soldiers to defend against a general advance by Byzantium soldiers. Khalid also knew that his cavalry reserves at the rear of the army would not be sufficient enough to reinforce both flanks simultaneously. Khalid had to act swiftly. To avoid his army crumbling, Khalid sent his left flank of Abu Ubaidah and Yazid forward towards both Vahan and Gregory's divisions, aiming to slow their advance and buy precious time for his men on the right flank. Once engaged on the left, Khalid then hastily rode towards the gaps that opened between Shurahbil and Amr as their lines began breaking under the weight of the Byzantine attack. Meanwhile, on the Muslim left, they were able to hold the initial Byzantine charge. But Vahan reinforced the attack with Byzantium archers, raining arrows overhead and decimating the Muslim lines.
Ready to fire! Fire!
The arrow volleys caused heavy losses to Abu Ubaida's and Yazid's divisions. No longer able to withstand the barrage of arrows, the Muslim left ordered a retreat outside the range of Byzantine archers.
I've seen the graveyard home with more about them than you.
With Khalid now committed on the right, Khalid's worst fear was realized. Byzantium General Gregory ordered the advance of his division, seeing that the Arabs were demoralized by the losses they took from Byzantine arrows. Soon after, Yazid's weakened division broke and gave way, leaving Abu Ubaida's force barely holding Vahan's Armenians. With the Muslim left quickly deteriorating, Arab women from their nearby camps picked up weapons and joined the fighting. The desperate fighting of the Arab women inspired the Muslim men to hold their ground even against the odds. On the opposite flank of the battlefield, Amr rallied his soldiers and halted Kanatir's advance. Khalid's cavalry reinforced Shurabil's ranks, and together they counterattacked and pressed Jabala's division. Meanwhile, on the right, the Byzantines finally retreated after many hours of fighting, and the rest of Vahan's line soon followed. The fourth day of the battle was devastating for both sides, with many casualties having been sustained, particularly for the Muslims. The next morning, Vahan sent an emissary, offering a truce to the Muslims. Arab commanders gathered for a war council. Khalid listened to his fellow generals, then stood up saying, "The past 4 days tested our resolve. Now is not the time to concede. Now is the time to be decisive." In this moment, Khalid saw opportunity. He was determined to go on the offensive. He sent his commander, Darar, with 500 cavalry on a flanking maneuver to blockade a key bridge across the Rakad Gorge that served as the main line of communication and was the key supply line between the Byzantine army and their camp. On the 6th day of battle, the commander of the Byzantine Greek right flank, Gregory, rode out into the middle of the battlefield. Gregory was reputed to be a formidable warrior. Muslim commander Abu Ubaida responded to Gregory's challenge. Abu Ubaida was the strategic commander of all Arab forces in Syria. Before leaving, he told General Khalid, "If I don't return, you shall resume command of the army after the battle, until the Caliph decides otherwise." And so Abu Ubaida, a man reported to be in his 50s, rode out to meet Gregory in battle. Both fighters met in the middle of the battlefield. Both reported to be formidable warriors in single combat. Upon engaging each other, they dueled fiercely for several minutes, as both armies watched on. Upon dueling, Gregory retreated back towards his line, a trick to try and fool Abu Ubaida into lowering his guard. As Abu Ubaida caught up with him, in a split second, Gregory turned to strike. Abu Ubaida ducked to evade the blow, striking the Greek general across the neck with his sword, killing him. Seeing this, Khalid knew now was the moment to strike. He ordered the Muslim line forward. Khalid spent most of the night reorganizing his soldiers, leaving squadrons of cavalry behind the infantry, and spreading their formations to make it appear to the Byzantines like the Arab numbers were not as impacted than previously thought. Khalid then took all of the remaining Arab cavalry and concealed them in the shallow dips of the battlefield plateau. Men in the Byzantine ranks could not believe that the Muslim army went on the offensive after suffering such heavy losses throughout previous days of fighting. As they clashed in the center, the Arabs pressed intensively. They were determined to drive the enemy back, but their numerical disadvantage meant that the Muslims could not sustain this offensive push for long. Just as Byzantine soldiers managed to slow the momentum of the Muslim advance, Khalid sprung his trap. Khalid, at the head of 8,000 Muslim riders, galloped forward, planning to surround the Byzantine left flank. Knowing that timing was of the essence, Khalid urged his men to ride swiftly and without hesitation. Speed would decide the outcome of this battle. General Vahan was busy commanding his soldiers in the center. He glanced to the left and saw the massive cloud of dust. Realizing that the Muslim commander had outwitted him, Vahan scrambled to send any available cavalry to reinforce the Byzantine left flank. The Muslim cavalry quickly ascended upon the Byzantine left, quickly enveloping Kanatir Slavs. The Arab riders followed their general as he guided them around the Byzantine main line. Commanders Kanatir and Jabala's lines began breaking as they braced for the impact of the Arab cavalry. It was reported that as the Muslim cavalry smashed into Vahan's left, Khalid pierced an enemy soldier, breaking his lance in two. Khalid ibn al-Walid then drew his sword, striking any and all Byzantine soldiers. The Arab cavalry rode furiously through the ranks, wreaking havoc among the Byzantine infantry. Jabala and the Ghassanids disengaged and started fleeing. But to their horror, they realized that the bridge across the Ruqad, their only escape route, had been blockaded. Jabala's men panicked and dispersed as each man tried to save himself. The Slavic prince Kanatir fought on bravely, but his Slavic soldiers were surrounded and stood no chance. The entire Byzantine line began collapsing. Vahan's army was being surrounded, with any stragglers being pushed back towards the cliffs. The Armenian general screamed orders, and while some Byzantine units kept their cohesion, others were in total disarray. Unable to cope with the rapid movement of the Arab light cavalry, Byzantine cataphracts were attacked on all sides. Seeing that the situation was hopeless, they fled, abandoning the infantry to their fate. Khalid steadied his steed, closed his eyes and whispered a prayer of gratitude.